What is up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. And today we're going to be into my February 3rd edition of the Bracketology here. Sorry, just got my wisdom teeth out yesterday, so I was not able to get this video out on the normal Friday, but we're going to be doing it today, just counting the games from Friday to it. But aside from that, let's get into this. There's some big games today for you to look out for today. On Saturday, we have a lot of top 10 matchups here. We have Houston, Kansas, 4 versus 8 down there in Kansas. That's going to be a big game for the Big 12 and obviously this bracketology. Duke, North Carolina. Not only are those teams 2 top 10 teams right now, but obviously that's always a big rivalry. If you did not know, North Carolina lost on Tuesday, I believe, to Georgia Tech, just like Duke did. So that was an unfortunate loss for them. And then we have Tennessee, Kentucky out of the SEC, 2 top 10 teams there. Both those teams actually did lose as well in their respective games. So both those teams could be taking 2 tough losses in this week, but or one of those teams. But anyway, let's look at this bracket watch. Top overall seed remains Purdue. They just barely survive on Wednesday, I believe, to Northwestern. But they're still going to be the number 1 overall seed. But I do think the gap is inching closer to UConn, who's been playing really good basketball right now. They're currently on beating St. John's 14-7, a really solid St. John's team right there on the road. So they can win that one. You never know what can happen. But first team out is going to be Florida. The Gators did beat Kentucky. They were that team that upset Kentucky at home. Not quite enough to overtake the last team in, which is the Colorado Buffaloes right there. If we look at this bubble here, starting out with the last 4 byes, we do have Texas right there. And then we have Providence, Texas A&M, and then Seton Hall. Last 4 in Memphis. They have continued to slide all the way down now to the barely in the tournament. If they don't start to get their crap figured out, they just lost to Rice, man. This team was a 4 seed not too long ago, like 3 weeks ago, and they are already down here to the last 4 and been a big collapse. And then we have Nebraska. Shout out to them coming back down big against Wisconsin. There was a stat that Wisconsin in the past like 15-ish years or something hadn't blown like a 14 or more lead at halftime, like ever. But guess what? Nebraska did that. They came back. It was a great game in overtime, and Nebraska got the win. And then we have Boise State right there, and then Colorado. First route, we do have Florida, Washington State, Gonzaga, and then Butler, who I believe, yesterday just beat Creighton, so they should be getting a boost from that on Tuesday's bracketology. And then the next route, Virginia trying to climb their way back up. Cincinnati, Villanova continues to falter, and then Oregon. All right, if we look at this bracket here, though, as we see the movement, Memphis is falling down to the play-in, as I mentioned there. In the Midwest region, Purdue, that number 1 overall seed. New Mexico going to be falling to the 8th seed. St. John's going to be dropping down to the 9 seed. Then we have Clemson dropping down to the 7, and Nebraska jumping up to the 10 seed. In the East region, we have UConn as that number 1 seed, playing really good basketball as well. How many games have they lost? Only 2 games so far. So the defending champs, they're really freaking good right now. A repeat, they're for sure in the mix to go for a repeat at this point. For sure a contender. Then we have Texas jumping up to the 9 seed. Kentucky going to be dropping down to the 5 seed after, as I mentioned, losing to Florida. They got a big game versus Tennessee today. That needs to boost them back up. Then we have Iowa State going to be falling to the 4 seed. San Diego State going to be dropping to the 6 seed. They just took a loss to, I believe it was Colorado State. Then we have Duke jumping up to the 3. And then in this South region also, Wisconsin's still the number 1 seed, and Tennessee even after they lost, or a 2 seed. So that's interesting. But in the South region, Houston, the number 1 seed right there. Ole Miss can be jumping to the 8 seed. Florida Atlantic jumped it to the 5. UC Irvine gonna be jumping up to the 12 seed. And that's it. Not a whole lot of movement, honestly, this bracketology. But West Region, North Carolina still a 1 seed, and that's fair. I don't see Arizona, Wisconsin, Tennessee, or Marquette even deserving to be ahead of them just from one loss. So that's for sure fair for North Carolina. They're one of the 4 best teams in the country right now. I don't even think that's really up for debate. But anyway, TCU jump into the 8. Mississippi State going to be falling to the 9 seed. And then South Carolina beating Tennessee. They're going to be jumping up to the 6 seed. Okay, let's get into this here, this bracketology. Starting out with the first 4 games, Boise State, Colorado. In this game, I do think I'm going to go with the better team, in my opinion, which is Boise State. I've not really been the biggest believer in Colorado this year. Then we have Green Bay beating Southern there. Oh, crap. Okay, we did 2 Colorado Boise States, but it is supposed to be Seton Hall Memphis here. So let's change that. And I do have to go with Seton Hall the way Memphis has been playing. I don't see him getting a win in the tournament. And then Central Connecticut, I do think, beats NC Central. Okay, let's get into this bracket here, though. Purdue, Green Bay. I do have to go with Purdue in that matchup. New Mexico, St. John's. I am going to still trust that St. John's team. They are a really good team. This is a big game versus UConn for them to maybe come back. It looks like they're coming back right now. The score is 16-16 with 12 minutes left in the first half. So hanging around right there. Do like that St. John's team a lot. And then Baylor, Appalachian State. I do have to go with Baylor in that matchup, as well as Auburn beating Akron. Utah State, Grand Canyon. Last time I went with Utah State. This time I'm going to go with Grand Canyon. Crazy how that works out. Last time I said I was debating between this matchup. Utah State I picked, and they went to the Elite 8. This time, I think that Grand Canyon gets this upset and moves on to the round of 32 and 11 versus 6. That's a really good matchup between 2 good teams, man. Then we do have Kansas beating Drexel. Then I'm going to go with the 10 over 7 upset here. I'm going to go with Nebraska to beat Clemson. And then Marquette, I do think, would pull off the win over Colgate. Down here, North Carolina, Central Connecticut. I do think I will go with North Carolina. TCU, Mississippi State. I'm going to go with the 8 seed TCU in that game. BYU, I do think, would pull off the win over McNeese State. Illinois, I think, would beat Samford. Another really good matchup. South Carolina done really good in the SEC. It's just hard to pick against them. I'm going to go with Indiana State. And by the way, Creighton Morehead State, if you didn't know, Creighton did just lose last night to Butler. So I do think that Creighton is a team that could maybe go on a run here. But I do think I would go with Creighton in that game. Sorry, that didn't make any sense. I was a little bit distracted there, but Creighton did lose to Butler last night. But it's a little bit of an inconsistent team in Creighton, but I do think they will be able to handle a business against a Morehead State team, who is a good 14 seed, but I don't think they would be able to pull that one off. And then St. Mary's, Texas Tech. I am going to go with the... This one's a tough one. I'm going to go with Texas Tech, though, in that game. And then I do think Arizona would beat Eastern Washington. So, tough matchups there, but all chalk in that region, even with the 8 versus 9. Moving on, UConn, Eastern Kentucky. I am going to go with Eastern Kentucky. Michigan State, Texas, 8 versus a 9 seed. I do think that Tom Izzo's squad would be able to pull that one off. Give me Michigan State. Kentucky, Richmond. That one could be a 5 over 12 or 12 over 5, but I am going to go with Kentucky. Iowa State, Cornell. Why not go with an upset pick here? I'm going to go 13 Cornell. I just don't really have the biggest faith in Iowa State, honestly. It's still a young team there. They dealt with a lot of turbulence last season. I know that's last season, but some of that stuff with the coaching stuff and all the player stuff that could carry over to this year. in the tournament. It's a good Iowa State team. Don't get me wrong; they beat Kansas, but sometimes you just got to trust your gut on some of these teams. And I think Iowa State's one of those teams that, if you look throughout Big 12 play, they've led a lot at halftime, and they've kind of blown leads and almost lost games. So I do think it's a little bit of an inconsistent team. Cornell, the Ivy League is a good conference right now. I think they're going to be battle tested. So give me Cornell to pull off a big upset and a 13 seed. And then San Diego State, Seton Hall, 6 versus 11. I am going to go with San Diego State in that game. Duke, I do think, pulls off the win over Vermont. Northwestern, I think, would beat Providence, and then Tennessee beats Quinnipiac. Okay, down in this region, Houston, South Dakota State. I am going to go with Houston. Ole Miss, Utah, not the biggest fan of either of these teams. If I had to pick at this point, I would go with Ole Miss there. Florida Atlantic, UC Irvine. I want to go with the 12 over 5. But do I see Florida Atlantic losing to UC Irvine here? I just don't see it. So we're going to go with, again, over the past few bracketologies, a theme has been not really picking the 12 over 5 upsets. And I just don't see like these 12s, honestly, this year. I think a lot of the good mid-major teams are 11 seeds, like Indiana State and Grand Canyon and St. Mary's and teams like those. But yeah, I do think Florida Atlantic would be able to prevail in that one. And then Dayton, I do think, would pull off the win over Charlotte. Then I'm going to go with another 11 over 6 here. Give me Boise State to pull off the win over Oklahoma. I always mention it. First 4 teams usually one of them usually gets at least one win in the round of 64. And I see that one happening here with a good Boise State team out of the Mountain West over an Oklahoma team who's good, but an inconsistent team as a 6 seed. And then Alabama, I do think, would pull off the win over High Point. Colorado State, Texas A&M. I'm going to put my faith in Texas A&M, who I have basically all year in these first matchups. I do think they get that win eventually over Colorado State, but that one could go either way. And then I do think that Wisconsin will beat Sam Houston State. A little bit of a longer round of 64, a lot of in-depth analysis in that one. But moving on to the round of 32, Purdue St. John's could be an upset, but I am going to have to lane with Zach Edey and Purdue in that game. Baylor Auburn 5 versus a 4 seed. Last time I went with Baylor, I do think I'm going to stick with that trend. Auburn has lost. They haven't really beaten anyone good, so I need to see them beat someone good if they're going to want to beat a team like Baylor, who's clearly battle-tested from the Big 12. Then Kansas Grand Canyon. I need to see it. My eyes need to see it for Kansas. I know they beat Oklahoma State, but I need to see them just get a dominant win here for me to just kind of set apart from the the Kansas team has been so inconsistent, and I'm a big believer in Grand Canyon, so why not have some fun, go with an 11 seed to make a run to the elite, or to the Sweet 16 right there. We'll see what happens with the game versus Houston tonight, but I'm going to go with Grand Canyon to pull off a massive upset. And then Nebraska Marquette 2 versus a 10 seed. Give me Nebraska in this game. They're playing great ball in the Big Ten. Really like how this team has established a culture there. So we're going to have another double-digit seed. Marquette, I'm just still not a believer of, honestly. They almost lose to Villanova this week. They're an inconsistent team, man. So I'm going to go with Nebraska to win it. All right, and then North Carolina TCU. I do like North Carolina in that matchup for a 1 versus an 8. BYU, Illinois. Last time it went to Illinois. Why not flip it up? Go with my BYU Cougars in that matchup over Illinois. South Carolina, Creighton, 3 versus a 6 seed. Let's go with South Carolina in an upset. Another 3 seed falls there. South Carolina is playing great ball. Creighton, really good team, but I do think they could lose against a team like South Carolina. And then I do think Arizona would survive versus Texas Tech in that matchup. So a little bit more upset so far in this round of 32. Let's see how it shapes up in this region. UConn, Michigan State do have to go with the dominance of Connecticut at this point. Kentucky, I don't think would be falling or losing to Cornell in that matchup. Cornell, that would be tough to beat a really good Iowa State team, and then Kentucky back-to-back. So give me Kentucky. And then Duke, San Diego State. I do think the first 3 seed moves on there. Give me Duke. Tennessee, Northwestern, 2 versus a 7 seed. Just because Tennessee lost to a good South Carolina team barely doesn't mean that I'm going to go back on the hating train on Tennessee. Give me them to pull off the win over a good Northwestern team. Okay, Houston, Ole Miss, 1 versus a 4 and an 8 seed. Give me Houston in that game. Dayton, Florida Atlantic, interesting matchup between 2 of these kind of, not Power 6 conference schools. Florida Atlantic, Dayton. Dayton is kind of a weird team at the 4 seed. Same with Florida Atlantic. I'm gonna go with Dayton though at this point in time, just barely giving them the edge. And then Alabama, Boise State. I do think Alabama would win that one. And then Wisconsin, I do think can respond. Give me them to beat Texas A&M. So a little bit of chalk in the right side. We have some upsets in this side. So anyway, moving on. Purdue, Baylor. I do have Purdue moving on to the Elite Eight over the Baylor Bears in that matchup. Good matchup there, though. And then we have Grand Canyon, Nebraska. 10 versus 11 seed. Give me Grand Canyon to make a run to the Elite Eight. Give them some love. Grand Canyon moves on past the 10 seed in Nebraska. Then we have North Carolina, BYU here. 1 versus a 5 seed. I'm going to go with my BYU Cougars. I'm going to put faith in my team. I love this team. They're really high powered. They can beat anyone in the country if they're hitting their shots. I think they have a good day versus North Carolina. I've been a North Carolina believer the past few times. Doesn't mean I'm not. I'm going to take a little bit of a step back and have them lose a little bit earlier than I normally do. So give me BYU. And then Arizona, South Carolina. I do think that South Carolina, the 6th seed, wins that one and moves on to the Elite Eight. 6th seed South Carolina beats Arizona. Arizona just been a weird team as well there. So give me South Carolina. A lot of weird 2 seeds, honestly, this year. But moving on, UConn, Kentucky, 1 versus a 4 seed. I'm going to have to go with UConn. Moving on there in that game. And then Duke, Tennessee, 2 versus a 3 seed. These are going to be some big games for these two. Duke against North Carolina and Tennessee versus Kentucky. They're both going on the road for their respected matchups. So it's going to be tough. I think at this point in time, though, I'm going to go with the 3-seeded Duke Blue Devils in that game to pull off the upset. Okay, Houston, Dayton, 1 versus a 4 seed. Give me Houston to move on in that game. And then Alabama, I think, would be able to get the win over Wisconsin. Okay, so for a spot in the Final Four, Purdue, Grand Canyon, 1 versus an 11 seed. I do have to go with Purdue in that game. That would be the most Purdue loss ever, to lose to a mid-major team in the Elite Eight. But I do think Purdue would pull off the win and end Grand Canyon's crazy run. And then we have a weird matchup here between BYU and South Carolina. 4 or 5 versus a 6 seed. I am going to go with my BYU Cougars to continue their run, moving on past South Carolina to the Final Four. In this region, UConn, Duke, 1 versus a 3 seed. I am going to have to go with UConn, though, in that game. They're just playing so good, man. It's tough to pick against them. Give me UConn. And then Houston, Alabama, 1 versus a 3 seed. Really good matchup here, but I am going to give the 1-seeded Houston team some love. So I'm going to go with 3 1-seeds here. Give me them to pull off the win over Alabama. So we have some craziness in the round, Sweet 16, but eventually it does come up with 3 1-seeds and then 1 5-seed in BYU right there. But for a spot in the national championship game, Purdue versus BYU, I do think that's where my Cougars run will come to an end. That's just going to be a tough matchup for us to guard Zach Edey down there. And then UConn, Houston, 1 versus a 1 seed. Give me the dominance of Connecticut to move on. So we're going to have a rematch here of last videos. Purdue versus UConn. What a championship this would be. This time I'm going to go with UConn, though, and Purdue comes up short, man. It's just hard to pick against UConn. They're playing so good. They are a little bit struggling right now against St. John's, only been winning by a point, but we'll see what happens in that at this point in time. I think this UConn team is going to be too tough to stop, and they're going to get a back-to-back championship for the first time since, I believe, Florida did it. So anyway, guys, thank you all for watching this video today. Hopefully y'all enjoyed the content. Comment down below your predictions. Anyway, guys.